We are back with part 2 of our money making, money saving, money budgeting, debt video. This one is specifically devoted to debt. So if you didn't watch the first video, this is Ben.
Hey YouTubers.
Ben is my accountant and friend. We've known each other for years. Do you want to just quickly tell us kind of like a little backstory on your business as an accountant? Because he's not like an accountant working at an old-timey firm. So tell us about a little bit about you and what you're doing.
So I have a little practice in New York, and I am, I guess, the boss in that it's my company, and I have my employees and stuff that work for me. We're small. We've got just 3 of us now. We got the next one starting next week, or 4 of us, I should say, 3 employees. And we work pretty much with people in the creative fields, agencies, freelancers, bloggers, you know, all kinds of Instagram stars, wonderful people like
Aww, he was paid to say this.
I was not paid to say that. I did get snacks earlier though.
I did make him a snack tray. So you kind of are like bridging that gap between like a traditional, like kind of more like accountant style person with an entrepreneur, which is why I think Ben is great at his job, because he kind of understands the plight of both. He has been in the position of growing his business. He has been through the experience of debt, all of these things. And so it's kind of like why I only go to female gynecologists. And I know we didn't know if we were gonna go off the rails with this female gynecology segment, but I like going to a female gynecologist because when I say I have a period cramp, they've had one and they know what it feels like. And same thing with Ben. You're an entrepreneur yourself, you've grown a business, you've gone through all these things. And so for me, I feel so much better about talking about stuff like debt and making money with someone that's actually been doing a similar thing. So in today's video, we're gonna talk about debt specifically. The first one was on budget, but today we're gonna talk about kind of what to prioritize with debt, kind of how to manage the stress and anxiety around it. We're gonna talk about strategies, we're gonna talk about all of it. So stick with us for the full video. But first then, what do we prioritize first with our debt? I'm gonna prioritize that question first because I think it's important.
Well, I mean,
what kinds of debt are there that people experience most commonly?
People have a lot of different debts. I mean, I think anybody, you know, in our generation, younger, a little bit older, somewhere in that world, I mean, everybody's got student loan debt at some point or another. Maybe we're fortunate that we've got it paid off or got a little bit of help there, but that's a pretty common one. But a lot of people run into trouble with credit cards, and you know, even if you've gotten to a place where you're buying a house and you got a mortgage and remortgaged and done that.
Right.
I mean, debt is something that people aren't talking enough about, except for those ridiculous commercials you hear that say, get rid of your debt now. But I mean, peer to peer, just friend to friend, people being honest with each other about the financial situation that they've got going on and where their debts are and what they are.
So when we have all these different pockets of debt, whether it be credit card or student loan or anything, like, let's say you have a couple. Let's say you're making an okay amount of money, but you still have student loan debt or you still have credit card debt. Maybe you owe your uncle 50 bucks. I don't know what kind of debt you have, but what do we prioritize first? Like, what are the things that really like hurt us in the long run, and what can we kind of like
the first thing that you want to do is you want to stop the bleeding. So if you are actively using credit cards and taking on new debt, part of what we talked about in budgeting is understanding where your spending is going. You want to make sure you're not taking on any new debt. After that, people have the idea that you should always focus on the one with the highest interest rate, and that makes mathematical sense. That's great. The problem is if finances was just math, then economists would be rich, and they're not. I know a few that are not.
We're like, F you, economists.
You have to take into account some of the psychological stuff, and one of the things that works well, it's called like the baby steps or the snowball method, where you take your smallest debts and you try and knock them out first, and then whatever you're putting towards that debt, you put towards the next one in the list. You rank them in terms of smallest to largest debt, and this way you feel really good, and by the time you got to tackle the big ugly, you've got a lot of momentum and you're throwing a lot of money at it.
And you're also used to saving.
Yeah.
I think that's such a like interesting thing, because I always thought it was, because I had a credit card at one time. So when I started my business, being an event planner, I think in the grand scheme, it was the right thing to do. I think, you know, if things hadn't worked out the way they did, it might have been a bad idea. But basically what I did was I was taking you know, all the expenses from events that I would have to spend out of pocket that I would be reimbursed for, and I was putting those on a credit card. And then my clients would pay me in cash or a check. Obviously, they didn't hand me like a briefcase of cash because that would be a weird thing. But I was taking the cash, putting it in my savings and checking account because I was so afraid to run out of money to pay things like rent, because you can't pay rent on a credit card. And so I built up credit card debt about, I think it was about $23,000, somewhere around there. I was paying about $600 worth of interest a month on my credit card debt. And at the time, I had no idea how much it was weighing on me mentally. I had plenty of money in the bank. I ended up making money with my business. And at one point I was like, I have this chunk of $23,000 worth of debt. And I actually called Ben, and we were talking about retirement, and we were talking about saving and all of this stuff. And then he asked me the simple question. He's like, well, you don't have any debt. And I'm like, I mean, debt schmet, like I've got like 23, but I got the money to pay it off. And he's like, well, you should probably do that before you think about saving. And I was like, this makes a lot of sense. And so that day we got off the phone, and I immediately went to my credit card account and I paid it. And I understand that not everyone has the money to pay off their debt that way. But the reason I'm telling this story is that it was a psychological thing of me, of fear surrounding debt and surrounding being an entrepreneur. But also, before I could think about saving or future, it was about paying down that debt. Like you said, stop the bleeding. It was $600 a month in interest payments toward that amount of money. And I would be paying the minimum payment. I never got behind on payments, but it was breaking even. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really like, if I could go back, I wouldn't say I would change the way I did things, but I certainly probably would have paid it off a lot sooner. So in the prioritization, you want to go lowest to highest, perhaps, if that works for you with the momentum idea. It's a good
strategy. If you're having trouble doing it just without any kind of system, it's a nice strategy because you get some of those short-term wins. That first one that you get to pay off, God, it feels awesome. I mean, somebody who's done it too, like, it feels really good.
And maybe it's not the amount of money. It's like kind of these little pockets. It's more like the more you get down, not the amount of money you get down.
Right. Being able to check one off a list feels really good.
Yeah.
You know, that progress is great.
That's why I always, on my to-do list, I write like really minimal little things, just so I feel like I'm really getting stuff done. Like, pick up the living room. I'm like, yes.
Done.
All right. So we've talked a lot about kind of the psychology of debt, even in the small wins conversation, but there is a lot of stress and anxiety surrounding debt and a lot of shame. So I wanted to ask you, like, how you dealt with that personally, but also how we can deal with it better.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll share candidly my own story on this. Is, you know, years ago, my wife and I both had really great jobs, and I was an accountant. Still am an accountant. My wife was teaching, and then she lost her teaching job, and we made a decision at that point to have her stay home for the kids that we were going to have and now have. And we were supposed to have scaled back our lifestyle. We didn't quite do it. American Express made up the difference. And over time, we ran up some numbers that were not small.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, I can say this now, but it was, you know, a couple of years ago, I had a moment where I was like, I'm an accountant. I tell people how to deal with their finances all the time. I can't talk to anybody about this, like this crippling debt that's weighing on me. And I broke down, it was, I remember it clearly, it was a New Year's Eve. And I called another accountant friend of mine in tears and said, look, I just need to be honest with somebody about it. His name's Barrett Young. He's in Maryland. He's a wonderful human being. I love him. But he talked me through it. And I mean, he had dealt with it himself. And he said, you're like, look, buddy, you just got to be honest about it to start with. And I mean, I have a huge respect for how hard that is for everybody to just be honest about how much debt they're in. And it's a shame that we all can't talk about it a lot more openly. You know, in the same way that you're like, oh, I had to go to the doctor because my foot hurt. Like, you know, you have to deal with your debt. It's a sickness. I mean, it's something that will weigh on you and has a tremendous mental toll on not just, you know, financially, but how you interact with other people and the progress you can make in other areas of your life. It's huge. People don't give it the respect it deserves.
And really, like, I in my kind of debt situation, I never realized the amount of weight I was carrying about it. Like the mental, emotional weight. until it was gone. And then it kind of put in perspective how much it was really affecting my life, and how I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell anyone because I felt ashamed that I had it, first of all. I felt also like maybe I didn't make the right decision about creating the debt. But then also for me, it was like, I don't know exactly how to tackle it. And so I don't even have a recipe for fixing it. And so I would just encourage any of you, if you're dealing with the stress and anxiety of debt, I think understanding that other people deal with it too is like, I think the openness of that is really important. I think Brené Brown, if you guys haven't read any Brené Brown books, you should read them all. But she talks about vulnerability and the power of it. And I think that even translates into talking about finances, of like, if you can share what your struggles are with people, not only can they help you and support you, but often they are struggling with this similar thing or have struggled with it before, and that creates an amazing amount of empathy. So what we need is more financial empathy.
Yeah.
Debt empathy. I'm into it. Let's write a book. She's made millions. So yeah, I think if you're working through any of that, just understanding that we all are working through that on some level. Even an accountant.
Who are supposed to know better. This is why I say debt is not a mathematical problem, it's an emotional thing. Because I know better, I know how money works. I mean, it's what I do all day, and it was this problem I found myself in. And we worked through it, and I mentioned the snowball method because that's something that worked for us, is you take care of the little ones first, and those wins were huge, and my wife and I would celebrate them, and it was like, yes, this one's paid off, that's awesome. It sounds.
And then you would eat your ramen noodles. You would eat ramen noodles to celebrate because you're on a budget.
Yes.
All right. So I think, the honesty behind kind of the shame and anxiety on it, but then also having some tools. You can go back to the budget video and watch some tools of actually dealing with that. Yeah. What do you say to people that feel like their debt is too big?
It's not. My dad used to say a thing whenever he loved doing landscaping projects, and they always were huge and daunting to us as kids. He would come home to like 5 dump truck loads of dirt, and he would say, well, how do you eat an elephant? He'd say, 1 bite at a time. You can't eat the whole thing at once. And it's the same thing with debt. You pick it apart, you have to be honest about what it is. I mean, whether it's, a mouse or an elephant or a whole fucking building. Sorry.
No, this YouTube channel is very pro-cursing.
Okay. But you have to be honest about what it is, and sometimes that's just being honest with yourself as a starter, being honest with your spouse, being honest with your friends, your support system of people who can help you. And then once you see what it is, don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. So you may not be able to pay off $100,000 in a year. Very few people can. You can probably pay off $1,000. You can probably go through your closet, as I don't know if it's this video or the last one, but you can go through and find little bits of money that you can pay down a few other things. And one of the really great tools that helps people from backsliding on it. So just like when we talked about budgeting and people get all amped up and the first few months are fun and you're paying down debt, and after a while it kind of sucks for a little bit. And then as you're close to the end, it feels good again. But one of the big things that you can do is you build up an emergency fund. So the debt is no longer your emergency fund. So when something goes wrong,
it's not American Express.
Exactly.
Okay.
You put away, whatever you might need, $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,500. You come up with a small amount that'll cover the problems that you're likely to have. A client doesn't pay you if you're freelance, or if a paycheck doesn't come through, or your car breaks, or whatever we might be looking at. You come up with a number for that, and that's what funds those types of.
Would you say? I know that I think I read this in a Dave Ramsey book, and we were talking about Dave Ramsey earlier, who has his own style, let's say style, but has some good fundamentals for financial kind of tactics, I guess. But I know he says in the book, in one of his books, there's like, you figure out your expenses for X amount of, I can't remember if it was weeks or months, and then that could be your emergency. Do you remember what that was?
3 to 6 month reserves. So yeah, in the baby steps that he outlines, the first thing is you get the starter emergency fund, which is, $1,000 or $1,500, something like that.
Like, let's say you have like your car breaks.
Yeah, it covers those types of emergencies, things that probably will happen at some point. We just don't know which one of the things it's going to be.
Right.
Then you work on paying down your debt, and then once that's done, they want you to build up a 3 to 6 month emergency fund. Now, if you're a freelancer, I usually recommend having a bigger emergency fund before you go all in on the debt, just because, you know, your life is a lot more unpredictable financially. If a client decides to pay you a month later, or you get stuck in a big job where you have to have a lot of, you know, expenses outlaid where you don't have them up front, you know, that can really bind you up.
So first priority is emergency fund, so we don't make the debt worse. Then you start working on the debt. And then we work on small debts first, up to big ones.
Yep.
I love it. Those are some like really great strategies around paying your debt. If you have any other questions about debt, money, whatever, we're gonna keep making videos with Ben, hopefully, but also I'm going to be working on some about credit cards, and maybe even doing one on investing with an investment expert who can help us kind of understand that more as I delve into it more in 2019. But thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Let us know any questions in the comments, and where can we find you?
Instagram, I guess, at Benjamin Sargent.
Yeah, we'll link it down below. All right, thanks guys.
Great, thanks. Bye. Bye.